There is a quiet irony in watching the dusk settle over Windsor. The castle, once the backdrop to a life defined by ceremony and clear purpose, now stands as a silhouette against a shifting public mood. And within its grounds lives a prince whose story no longer fits the script he once inherited. Prince Andrew was born into certainty. His early life unfolded in rooms where rank carried weight, where duty was scripted, and where the expectations placed upon him were firm but reassuring. For decades, he walked into official engagements with the confidence of a man who believed his place was secure. Titles, uniforms, and tradition shaped every chapter. But modern Britain has altered its rhythm. The country that once welcomed royal presence with unchallenged deference now asks different questions. Of value, of conduct, of accountability. In this new landscape, Andrew's position is no longer defined by privilege, but by consequence. Observers often mark the turning point with a single moment in the public eye. Yet the deeper paradox begins here. A prince raised for visibility now lives in a world where visibility carries risk. His footsteps, once followed by cameras of celebration, are now measured by a quieter, narrower attention, one shaped as much by absence as by presence. The contradiction is clear. How does a man formed by tradition navigate a nation that increasingly prioritises scrutiny? And how does someone once central to the institution adjust to a life shaped by retreat? This is where the story begins, with a prince who entered public life in uniform and ceremony, and who now confronts the weight of public memory. Before the public scrutiny that would later define his name, Prince Andrew occupied a place in British life marked by clarity and, at times, admiration. His naval career formed the backbone of this early image. As a young officer, he embraced a structure that offered purpose and discipline. During the Falklands War, his role as a helicopter pilot placed him squarely in a narrative of national service, a position that the public regarded with respect. At a time when military duty still held a special resonance, Andrew became one of the more relatable senior royals. Throughout the 1980s and 1990s, his responsibilities evolved into a series of overseas engagements and ceremonial duties. Andrew travelled widely, representing British economic interests, opening trade dialogues, and serving as a conduit between the United Kingdom and international partners. Reports at the time described him as assured, confident, and comfortable in the architecture of diplomacy. His manner, more direct than that of his siblings, often gave him an air of decisiveness that audiences interpreted as a sign of modernity. The marriage to Sarah Ferguson in 1986 added warmth to his public persona. Together, they projected a lighter, more informal royal presence. Their balcony appearances, public laughter, and willingness to engage warmly with crowds brought a brief sense of energy to the monarchy. For many, this was the moment Andrew felt closest to public affection, grounded by family life, and lifted by a narrative of contemporary royal partnership. Yet this period also embedded the first hints of dependency. His visibility, influence, and confidence remained supported by his royal role, by institutional alignment, and by a Britain that still viewed monarchy as central to national identity. The scaffolding beneath his public image was strong, but it was also fixed to a system that would change dramatically in the decades ahead. As the world moved forward, patterns began to emerge. Andrew gravitated towards high-profile networks and international circles where prestige carried its own currency. He seemed comfortable in environments shaped by status, hierarchy, and influence, traits understandable for someone raised within monarchy, but increasingly subject to public interpretation. In retrospect, the image he once held was shaped by a simpler era, one in which royal presence could stand unquestioned. This section reflects not on myth, but on the reality of a prince who once occupied a respected and visible role in national life. It is the foundation upon which the later contrasts and the eventual decline would be measured. By the time public attention turned sharply towards Prince Andrew, the quieter erosion of his standing had already begun. It was not the result of a single event, but a combination of shifting expectations and gradual changes in the monarchy's structure. Insiders and observers noted subtle shifts years before the turning point became visible to the wider public. The nature of royal work had changed. Britain's relationship with monarchy, once grounded in tradition, moved toward a more functional assessment. What value does each member bring, and how does the institution adapt to modern expectations? Within this evolving climate, Andrew's public role became less defined. The monarchy's focus centred increasingly on the direct line, first Charles, then William, creating a natural narrowing of official responsibilities for those outside succession. financial pressures added another layer. Maintaining the lifestyle associated with a senior royal became challenging without the extensive portfolio of duties once assigned to him. Reports referenced complex arrangements, private benefactors, and a dependence on mechanisms that reflected an earlier model of royal support. These details, individually unremarkable, collectively suggested a growing misalignment between Andrew's expectations and the resources available. His judgement, too, drew attention. Certain associations raised questions not of legal conclusion, but of perception. In an institution where symbolism carries as much weight as conduct, perception becomes a measure of viability. The public may not have voiced concern directly, but within royal and governmental circles, these decisions prompted unease. The gap between Andrew's public role and the expectations of modern scrutiny widened quietly. Meanwhile, the monarchy itself was tightening its structure. Streamlining meant fewer roles, fewer public duties, and greater emphasis on the immediate heirs. Andrew, once central through age and status, now found himself positioned at the edges of a system adapting to a different era. By the late 2010s, the decline was visible to those inside royal circles, even if the broader public had yet to notice. The elements of his former identity, naval officer, trade envoy, royal representative, no longer aligned seamlessly with a nation becoming more sceptical, more questioning, and more attuned to issues of judgment. It had not yet collapsed, but it was the quiet ground shifting beneath the surface, a prelude to the moment when private decline would meet public scrutiny. The true rupture in Prince Andrew's public standing arrived not through gradual accumulation, but through a single televised conversation that quickly became a cultural touchpoint. The interview, intended to bring clarity, instead raised questions that reshaped public perception almost overnight. It was a moment in which tone, timing, and presentation mattered as much as the content itself. Viewers watched closely. Reactions formed quickly. According to public commentary at the time, the disconnect between the seriousness of the subject and the manner of the responses left many unsettled. Analysts and commentators noted that the explanations offered did not align with the tone the public expected from someone in his position. It was not a matter of legal judgment, it was a matter of public confidence. Confidence that depended on clarity, empathy, and alignment with contemporary expectations of accountability. The response from organisations was swift. Charities paused or ended their affiliations. Institutions issued statements to create distance. Headlines across the country appeared within hours, reflecting a dramatic shift in tone. The interview became not simply a broadcast moment, but a national discussion point, one that followed Andrew long after the studio lights dimmed. Within the royal household, the implications were unavoidable. The monarchy, historically cautious in its handling of controversy, acted decisively. According to official announcements, Andrew stepped back from public duties for the foreseeable future, a phrase that signalled both urgency and finality. It was clear that the institution viewed the matter not as a brief disruption, but as a profound turning point. For many, this moment marked the transformation of Andrew's identity in the public mind. He was no longer the naval officer, the trade envoy, or the Queen's son performing ceremonial roles. He became the focus of scrutiny in a way that the monarchy had rarely experienced in the modern age. This was the point where narrative and identity diverged, where the image he once held collided with the expectations of a changing Britain. In the period that followed the turning point, Prince Andrew's world narrowed in ways both visible and subtle. The stepping back from public duties was more than a change of schedule. It signalled the restructuring of a life long defined by official purpose. Patronages were relinquished, military titles returned, and public engagements disappeared entirely. For the first time in decades, Andrew occupied a space within the monarchy, without representing it. Royal Lodge at Windsor became the centre of this new existence. Set within the quiet of Windsor Great Park, it offered privacy, but also a sense of containment. The gates that once opened to official visitors, press calls, and ceremonial guests now marked the boundary of a life lived largely out of sight. Cars arrived discreetly. Press interest subsided into occasional observation. Within those grounds, Andrew remained part of the institution, but at a distance from its public face. Family dynamics shifted in response. King Charles III, responsible for the long-term resilience of the monarchy, made decisions informed by both public sentiment and institutional necessity. His approach reflected a commitment to a streamlined monarchy, one in which roles must align tightly with public confidence. For Princess Beatrice and Princess Eugenie, The situation required quiet balance. They maintained their personal support for their father while continuing with their own careers and public identities. Their presence offered stability, but could not alter the broader reality that Andrew's standing within public life had fundamentally changed. Sarah Ferguson remained a consistent presence, reinforcing a bond that had survived divorce and decades of separate paths. Observers often noted the stability she brought, a sense of continuity in a period marked by retreat. Meanwhile, public perception did not move significantly. Trust, once diminished, rarely rebounds swiftly. Despite periods of silence or moments of speculation about a possible re-emergence, the national sentiment remained largely fixed. Andrew's presence in public life became defined by absence rather than expectation. This aftermath is not framed by dramatic events, but by the slow settling of consequence, a life continuing within royal grounds, shaped not by public duty, but by the absence of it. The story of Prince Andrew, viewed from a distance, becomes more than a personal narrative. It becomes a reflection of how Britain has changed, how its expectations of public figures have evolved, and how institutions must navigate an era where accountability and transparency carry unprecedented weight. In this setting, titles alone no longer determine trust, and history alone cannot secure relevance. Andrew's trajectory illustrates the fragility of reputation in a modern age. The privileges of upbringing and position, while significant, cannot eclipse the realities of public judgement. Nor can they shield an individual from the shifting moral landscape that now defines public life. His experience highlights the delicate balance between institutional tradition and personal responsibility, a balance that becomes ever more complex as society demands clarity over ceremony. For the monarchy, his story has carried lessons. It revealed the importance of alignment between personal conduct and institutional values. It underscored that public service must be accompanied by public confidence, and that the institution's survival depends on adapting to the expectations of a generation that views monarchy through a more critical, analytical lens. For Andrew himself, the result is a quieter existence, one defined not by engagements or ceremony, but by the confines of what remains. Royal Lodge, once a backdrop to family life and official duties, now stands as a symbol of this new chapter. Reserved, limited, reflective. This narrative does not seek to assign blame or absolution. Instead, it considers what his journey illustrates about legacy, consequence, and the evolving relationship between Britain and its monarchy. In many ways, Andrew's story mirrors a national shift, from deference toward scrutiny, from unquestioned privilege toward accountability. As the camera settles on the long corridor within Windsor Castle, the final impression is one of stillness. A life once marked by visibility now rests in the quiet margins of an institution adapting to a modern age.